Alexander Doyle stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of his Manhattan office, staring at his reflection, rather than the sprawling cityscape before him. The harsh fluorescent lights highlighted the deep creases around his eyes and the silver threads creeping through his dark hair. At 45, he had everything he'd ever wanted: CEO of a Fortune 500 company, a penthouse in the city's most prestigious neighborhood, and a reputation for being utterly unstoppable. Yet lately, the victory felt hollow. His executive assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "Mr. Doyle, the board is waiting in the conference room." Alexander adjusted his tie, a gesture so habitual he barely noticed it anymore. "Tell them I'll be there in 5 minutes." His voice carried the weight of 2 decades of command, but underneath lay an exhaustion he couldn't shake. The board meeting proceeded like countless others before it: quarterly projections, market analyses, strategic planning. Alexander delivered his presentation flawlessly, as always. But halfway through discussing the company's 5-year expansion plan, something inside him snapped. "And that concludes my proposal for the Asian market penetration strategy," he heard himself say. Then, without warning, he added, "Also, I'm taking a leave of absence, effective immediately." The silence that followed was deafening. Board members exchanged worried glances. Richard Montgomery, the eldest board member who had known Alexander since his early days, leaned forward. "Alexander, are you feeling all right?" "Perfect," Alexander replied, gathering his papers with steady hands that betrayed none of the turmoil churning inside him. "Janet will be acting CEO during my absence. She's more than capable, and you all know it." He nodded toward his second-in-command, who sat frozen in surprise. "But the Miller acquisition—" Someone started to protest. "We'll proceed as planned," Alexander cut in. "I've prepared detailed briefings for every major project. You'll find them in your emails within the hour." He stood, buttoning his jacket with the same precision he applied to everything in his life. "I haven't taken a vacation in 23 years. I think I've earned one." Later that evening, in his penthouse, Alexander sat in his home office, surrounded by the trappings of success that had consumed his entire adult life. His laptop screen glowed with an open browser, displaying a rental listing for a beach house in Newport, Rhode Island. The location had come to him instantly. A small coastal town far enough from New York to prevent any impromptu business meetings, yet close enough to return quickly if necessary. As he confirmed the booking, his eyes drifted to the only personal photo in the room: himself at age 10, standing on a beach similar to the ones in Newport. The image stirred something in him, a memory of salt air and endless possibilities. He couldn't remember the last time he'd felt that free. His phone buzzed continuously with messages from board members, business partners, and countless others demanding explanations. He ignored them all, focusing instead on packing a single suitcase. The process proved surprisingly difficult. Most of his wardrobe consisted of business suits and formal wear. Eventually, he found some casual clothes buried in the back of his closet, tags still attached. The next morning, Alexander rose before dawn, his usual time, but instead of heading to the office, he slipped into his rarely used Mercedes convertible. As he navigated through the quiet streets of pre-dawn Manhattan, a strange sensation settled over him. Not quite peace, but perhaps its distant cousin. The drive to Newport took longer than expected, traffic building as the morning progressed. Alexander found himself grateful for the delay. Each mile between him and New York felt like a weight lifting from his shoulders. He rolled down the windows, letting the spring air rush in, carrying with it the increasing scent of salt water. Newport emerged from the coastline like a postcard come to life. Historic mansions dotted the cliffs, while below, smaller homes and shops clustered around the harbor. Alexander followed the GPS to his rental, a modest but well-maintained house overlooking a quiet stretch of beach. The property manager, a middle-aged woman named Linda, greeted him with the kind of genuine warmth that seemed to permeate small towns. "Welcome to Newport, Mr. Doyle. I hope you'll find everything to your liking." Alexander nodded, accepting the keys. "I'm sure it will be fine." His clipped tone, perfected over years of business dealings, felt oddly out of place here. The beach access is private, Linda continued, either not noticing or choosing to ignore his brusqueness. And if you need anything, there's a wonderful little cafe just down the road. Bennett's Place. Best coffee in town, and Rachel's muffins are to die for. Thank you, Alexander replied, already turning toward the house. Inside, he found himself standing in the middle of the living room, surrounded by comfortable, lived-in furniture that bore no resemblance to his meticulously designed penthouse. Through the wide windows, he could see waves rolling onto the shore, their rhythm both foreign and somehow familiar. He unpacked methodically, hanging his clothes in the master bedroom's closet. The few casual pieces he'd brought looked lost among the empty hangers. Checking his phone out of habit, he found 37 missed calls and over 100 messages. With a decisive swipe, he turned it off completely. That evening, Alexander stood on the beach, watching the sun sink toward the horizon. He'd changed into a pair of khakis and a light sweater, clothing that felt like a costume on his frame. The beach was nearly empty, save for a few couples walking hand in hand and a family packing up their day's worth of beach toys. As darkness settled over the water, Alexander realized he had no plan for what came next. For the first time in decades, his schedule was completely empty. The thought should have terrified him, but instead, he felt something else stirring in his chest. Possibility. Walking back to the house, he caught the aroma of coffee and baked goods drifting from somewhere down the beach. He remembered the property manager's recommendation, Bennett's Place. Perhaps tomorrow he'd check it out, if only to establish some sort of routine in this unprecedented break from his normal life. In bed that night, listening to the distant sound of waves, Alexander tried to pinpoint the exact moment his life had become a series of meetings and deadlines. He couldn't. What he could remember was that little boy in the photograph, the one who had once spent entire days building sandcastles and chasing waves. Somewhere along the way, that boy had disappeared, replaced by spreadsheets and quarterly reports. As sleep finally began to claim him, Alexander wondered if perhaps that boy wasn't gone entirely. Maybe he was just waiting, like so many other things in his life, to be rediscovered. Morning arrived with the gentle persistence of waves against the shore. Alexander woke at precisely 5:30 a.m., his body refusing to abandon decades of routine. He lay in bed for a moment, disoriented by the unfamiliar ceiling and the sound of seabirds rather than city traffic. The events of yesterday felt almost dreamlike. His sudden announcement to the board, the drive to Newport, the quiet evening on the beach. Following muscle memory, he reached for his phone to check the markets, only to remember he'd turned it off. The sudden absence of his morning ritual left him adrift. After 20 minutes of restless tossing and turning, he got up and changed into running clothes. The beach stretched before him, empty save for a few early morning joggers and dog walkers. Alexander set off at a measured pace, his expensive running shoes sinking slightly in the sand. The resistance forced him to slow down, a metaphor not lost on him. Everything in Newport seemed designed to make him decelerate from the laid-back atmosphere to the very ground beneath his feet. An hour later, showered and changed, Alexander found himself following Linda's recommendation to Bennett's Place. The cafe occupied a weathered blue building just off the beach, with a wooden deck offering ocean views. The morning rush was in full swing, locals greeting each other by name as they collected their orders. Behind the counter, a woman with auburn hair pulled into a messy bun efficiently managed the morning chaos. She moved with the confidence of someone who knew every inch of their domain, calling out orders and remembering complex preferences without checking notes. Something about her struck Alexander as familiar, but he couldn't place it. "Welcome to Bennett's," she called out, not looking up from the espresso machine she was operating. "I'll be with you in just a minute." Alexander studied the menu board, appreciating its simplicity compared to the complicated offerings of his usual Manhattan coffee shops. When he reached the counter, the woman finally looked up, and for a split second, something flickered across her face. Recognition, perhaps, or alarm. But it vanished so quickly, Alexander wondered if he'd imagined it. "What can I get you?" she asked, her voice perfectly professional. "Black coffee and..." He glanced at the display case. "One of those blueberry muffins." Good choice. She rang up his order, her movements slightly more rigid than they'd been with previous customers. Name for the order? Alexander. She paused briefly before writing on the cup. That'll be $6.75. As he waited for his order, Alexander observed the cafe more closely. Photos lined the walls. Locals at various events, children growing up through the years, scenes of Newport through the seasons. It was the kind of personal touch that would never appear in a chain coffee shop. Alexander. A different barista called out his order. The muffin proved to be exceptional, just as Linda had promised. He found a seat on the deck, watching the morning unfold over the ocean. His peaceful reverie was interrupted by the sound of children's laughter. Two boys raced past the cafe, backpacks bouncing as they ran. Alexander's coffee cup froze halfway to his mouth as he stared at them, unable to process what he was seeing. The boys were identical twins, around 10 years old, with dark hair that fell across their foreheads in the same way his had at that age. One wore a red t-shirt, the other blue, but otherwise they were mirror images of each other, and of himself 3.5 decades ago. Alexander's hand trembled, causing coffee to slosh over the rim of his cup. The resemblance was uncanny, impossible to dismiss as coincidence. He watched as they ran down to the beach, expertly navigating the wooden steps despite their speed. Inside the cafe, the auburn-haired woman had stepped out from behind the counter. She stood at the window, watching the boys with an expression that confirmed Alexander's suspicions. These were her children. And somehow, inexplicably, they looked exactly like him. Memories began to surface, pushing through years of carefully maintained professional detachment. 11 years ago, during a brief business trip to Newport. A summer evening much like the one yesterday. A chance meeting at this very cafe. Rachel. The woman's name was Rachel Bennett. The coffee turned bitter in his mouth as more details emerged. They'd spent 2 weeks together, stealing moments between his business meetings. She'd been different from the sophisticated women he usually dated, genuine, unpretentious, full of laughter. When his business concluded, he'd returned to New York without looking back, convinced that anything more would complicate his carefully structured life. Now, watching the twins run along the beach, Alexander felt the ground shift beneath him. They had to be 10 years old, maybe 11. The timing aligned perfectly with that summer. His chest tightened as the implications became clear. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the deck. Through the window he saw Rachel quickly turn away, busying herself with the coffee machines. The twins had stopped at the water's edge, engaged in some sort of game involving elaborate jumping patterns in the sand. Alexander walked down to the beach, drawn by a force he couldn't resist. As he got closer, he could hear snippets of their conversation. "That's not how it goes, Liam," the one in blue protested. "Is to Ethan, you have to hop twice on the outside squares." Their voices carried clearly in the morning air, young and full of certainty. Alexander memorized their names, Liam and Ethan. His feet carried him closer until he was only a few yards away. Liam noticed him first, glancing up with curious eyes that mirrored Alexander's own. "Hi," he called out cheerfully. "Do you want to play numbers?" Ethan elbowed his brother, suddenly wary. "Mom says we're not supposed to talk to strangers." "Sorry," Alexander managed to say, his voice hoarse. "I was just walking." He forced himself to turn away, though every step felt like it was tearing something vital inside him. Behind him, he heard their game resume, their laughter following him up the beach like a haunting melody. Back in his rental house, Alexander paced the living room, his mind racing. The possibility that he had children, twins, had never once occurred to him in all these years. Rachel had never contacted him, never sought child support or any kind of acknowledgement. Why? The answer came almost immediately. She'd known exactly what kind of man he was, focused solely on his career, incapable of being the father any child deserved. He collapsed onto the couch, running his hands through his hair. The careful structure of his life, already shaken by his impulsive decision to take a break, now threatened to crumble entirely. Every certainty he'd built his existence around seemed to be dissolving, replaced by questions he'd never thought to ask. Through the window he could see the beach where Liam and Ethan had been playing. They were gone now, presumably headed to school, but their presence lingered like an echo. Alexander closed his eyes, but all he could see were their faces. His face, transformed by youth and innocence, untouched by the ambition that had shaped his adult life. The sound of waves filled the silence as Alexander confronted the magnitude of what he'd discovered. Somewhere in this small coastal town, two boys were going about their day unaware that their entire world was about to change. Because Alexander knew, with the same certainty that had driven his business decisions for years, that he couldn't walk away this time. The question was, what exactly did he plan to do about it? 2 days passed with Alexander watching Bennett's place from a distance, gathering fragments of the life he'd inadvertently helped create and then abandoned. Each morning, Rachel opened the cafe at 6. The twins usually appeared around 7:30, racing down to the beach before school. They returned in the afternoon, sometimes alone, sometimes accompanied by a tall man who seemed uncomfortably familiar with their routine. It was this man who now occupied Alexander's thoughts as he sat in his rental car across from the cafe. Dark-haired and athletically built, he carried himself with the easy confidence of someone who belonged. Alexander had overheard one of the twins, Ethan, he thought, call him Uncle Mark. The title seemed oddly formal, given the way Mark touched Rachel's shoulder when he entered the cafe, or how he ruffled the boy's hair with practiced affection. Alexander's jaw tightened every time he witnessed these casual intimacies. They spoke of years of presence, of earned trust, of everything he'd forfeited without even knowing what he'd lost. Today, however, Alexander had decided to break his self-imposed distance. He waited until Mark left, watching the man's truck disappear around the corner before walking into Bennett's place. The morning rush had subsided, leaving only a few regulars nursing their coffees. Rachel looked up as the bell above the door chimed, her hand stilled on the counter she'd been wiping, the cloth frozen mid-motion. "We need to talk," Alexander said quietly. "We really don't." Rachel's voice was controlled, but her knuckles whitened around the cloth. "The boys are none of your concern." "None," she cut him off, glancing around to ensure no one was within earshot. "You need to leave." Alexander stepped closer to the counter, lowering his voice further. "They're mine, aren't they?" The silence that followed felt endless. Rachel's green eyes, still as striking as he remembered, filled with a mix of fear and defiance. Finally, she said, "My shift ends at 2. Meet me at Easton's Beach, near the rocks at the north end." "And Alexander, if you come near my boys before we talk, I'll file a restraining order so fast your head will spin." The threat was delivered with such quiet certainty that Alexander simply nodded and left. The hours until 2 o'clock crawled by with excruciating slowness. He tried to distract himself by working on his laptop, responding to urgent emails that had accumulated during his digital silence. But his mind kept wandering to the twins, to Liam's easy smile and Ethan's watchful gaze. The beach was relatively empty when Alexander arrived, most tourists deterred by the overcast sky. He spotted Rachel immediately, standing near the rocks with her arms crossed. She'd changed from her cafe uniform into jeans and a sweater, her auburn hair whipping around her face in the ocean breeze. "You're early," she observed as he approached. "So are you." Rachel's laugh was hollow. "Well, punctuality was always your thing, wasn't it? Along with total dedication to your career and complete inability to maintain personal relationships." The bitterness in her voice made Alexander wince. "You could have told me." "Could I?" Rachel turned to face him fully. "Tell me, Alexander, what would you have done 11 years ago if I'd called to say I was pregnant? And be honest, not what you think you should say now, but what you would have actually done then." Alexander opened his mouth to protest, then closed it. The truth was uncomfortable but undeniable. "I would have sent money," he admitted. "Set up a trust fund, probably had my lawyer handle most of it." "Exactly." Rachel's voice softened slightly. "I didn't want money. I wanted a father for my children, and you weren't capable of being that then." "And Mark is?" The words came out sharper than intended. Rachel's eyes flashed. Mark has been there for every scraped knee, every school play, every nightmare. He coached their little league team. He taught them to ride bikes. He earned the right to be in their lives. But he's not their father. No, Rachel conceded. He's not. But he's been more of a father than a DNA match and a trust fund would have been. Alexander absorbed this, watching a seagull dive into the waves. Why did you stay in Newport? You must have known there was a chance I'd come back for business. This is my home. My family's here. The cafe was my grandmother's and I wasn't going to leave it. Rachel hugged herself tighter. Besides, you never stayed more than a day or two on your business trips. It seemed safe enough. Until now. Until now. Rachel sighed. What do you want, Alexander? Why are you really here? It was the question he'd been asking himself since he first saw the twins. I want to know them. They're not a business acquisition, Rachel snapped. You can't just decide you want them and expect immediate results. I know that, Alexander said, frustration creeping into his voice. But they're my sons. I have a right. You have no rights, Rachel cut in. You're not on their birth certificates. You've provided no support. Legally, you're a stranger to them. The words hit Alexander like physical blows, but he pressed on. Then why tell me the truth now? Why not just deny it? Rachel was quiet for a long moment, watching the waves crash against the rocks. Because they're starting to ask questions, she finally said. About their real father, Liam especially. He's like you, always wanting to understand everything. And because, she hesitated. Because they deserve to know where they come from, even if it hurts. I'm not the same person I was 11 years ago, Alexander said softly. Aren't you? You're still CEO of your company, still living in New York, still putting business first. I'm here, aren't I? I walked away from everything to take this break. A break, Rachel repeated. That's exactly my point. This is temporary for you. But they're not temporary, they're children. Complicated, emotional, demanding children who need stability and commitment. Alexander felt the truth of her words, but something else was building inside him. A certainty he couldn't explain. Let me prove it to you, he said. Give me a chance to show you I can be different. Rachel studied him for a long moment. I'll think about it, she finally said. But I have conditions. First, you don't tell them who you are. Not yet. They need time to get to know you as a person before dealing with all of this. Second, any interaction happens on my terms, when and where I say. And third, her voice hardened, if you hurt them, if you make promises you can't keep, if you disappear again, that's it. No more chances. I understand, Alexander said solemnly. Do you? Because once they know, once they let you in, you can't just go back to your old life. They'll expect you to be there for birthdays, school events, random Tuesday afternoons when something exciting happens. They'll need you, even when it's inconvenient. The magnitude of what he was agreeing to settled over Alexander. It would mean completely restructuring his life, potentially stepping back from his role as CEO, dividing his time between New York and Newport. The old Alexander would have found the prospect terrifying. But watching another seagull soar overhead, free and purposeful, he felt something else entirely. Hope. I want to try, he said simply. Rachel nodded slowly. Okay. But we do this my way. She pulled out her phone and created a new contact. I'll text you when and where you can accidentally run into us. And Alexander? Mark can't know about this yet. He's protective of the boys. As if summoned by his name, a truck appeared in the beach parking lot. Mark's truck. Rachel noticed it too. You need to go, she said urgently. Take the path up to the street. Don't let him see you. Alexander wanted to resist, to stand his ground, but he recognized the wisdom in avoiding confrontation. As he climbed the path to the street, he heard Mark's voice carry on the wind, calling out to Rachel. The familiar way she called back made something twist in his chest. In his rental house that evening, Alexander sat at the dining room table with his laptop open, staring at an email draft to his board of directors. The cursor blinked at him as he tried to find the right words to explain that his temporary break might become something more permanent. Outside, the sun set over the ocean, painting the water in shades of gold and purple. His phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. Tomorrow, 3 p.m., Hampton Beach. The boys like to get ice cream at Miller's stand. Don't be obvious. Alexander saved the email draft and closed his laptop. Tomorrow would bring his first real interaction with his sons, even if they didn't know who he was. The thought filled him with equal parts terror and anticipation. He walked out onto the deck, listening to the rhythm of the waves and wondering if somewhere along this same beach, two young boys were doing the same thing, sharing the same DNA, the same sunset, but living in a completely different world. For now. Hampton Beach buzzed with mid-afternoon activity as Alexander walked along the shoreline, his shoes dangling from one hand. He'd arrived 30 minutes early, unable to contain his nervous energy. The ice cream stand Rachel had mentioned sat at the edge of the beach, its blue and white awning fluttering in the breeze. He'd spent the morning obsessing over his appearance, trying to strike a balance between approachable and casual. The designer clothes he usually wore seemed too formal for a beach setting, but the few casual items he owned felt like a costume. He'd finally settled on khaki shorts and a light blue polo shirt, though he couldn't shake the feeling that he looked exactly like what he was, a corporate executive attempting to blend in at the beach. At precisely 3 o'clock, he heard them before he saw them. Liam's laugh carried across the beach, followed by Ethan's more reserved voice arguing about something. Alexander turned to see the twins walking with Rachel, their sneakers kicking up sand as they made their way toward Miller's ice cream stand. Following Rachel's texted instructions, Alexander positioned himself near the stand, pretending to study the menu. His heart hammered against his ribs as the family approached. 2 scoops of chocolate chip, Liam announced loudly. You always get chocolate chip, Ethan said. Try something different. Why? It's the best flavor. Alexander smiled despite himself. He'd always preferred chocolate chip too. He felt Rachel's eyes on him as she guided the boys to the counter. Oh, hey, she said, her casual tone masking the orchestrated nature of their meeting. You're the guy from the cafe, right? Alexander turned, feigning surprise. Yes, good memory. Best coffee in town, by the way. Liam, ever curious, looked up at him. Do you live here? I've never seen you before. I'm renting a house for a while. Alexander replied, his throat tight with emotion at directly addressing his son for the first time. Taking a break from the city. Which city? Liam pressed, while Ethan watched silently from behind his brother. New York. Cool. Liam's eyes lit up. We went there once for a school trip. Did you see the dinosaurs at the museum? Alexander chuckled. Many times. The T-Rex is quite impressive, isn't it? Boys, Rachel interrupted gently. Let's order our ice cream. What flavor would you like, Ethan? While Rachel helped Ethan choose between mint chocolate chip and cookie dough, Liam continued questioning Alexander. What do you do in New York? I run a company, Alexander said, carefully keeping his answer vague. Like Mom runs the cafe? Something like that, yes. Alexander glanced at Rachel, who was pointedly focusing on helping Ethan with his selection. What kind of company? Liam persisted. Before Alexander could answer, a familiar truck pulled into the beach parking lot. Rachel tensed visibly as Mark emerged, his expression darkening when he spotted Alexander. Uncle Mark, Liam called out, waving enthusiastically. We're getting ice cream. Mark strode over, placing himself subtly between Alexander and the twins. I can see that, buddy. Mind if I join you? Rachel touched Mark's arm lightly. I thought you had a client meeting this afternoon. Finished early, Mark replied, his eyes never leaving Alexander. Thought I'd surprise the boys. Who's your new friend? The tension in his voice was unmistakable. Alexander maintained his composure, extending his hand. Alexander Doyle. I'm staying in Newport for a while. Mark ignored the offered hand. Mark Harris. I help Rachel with the boys. The possessive undertone was clear. An awkward silence fell, broken only by the ice cream vendor asking for their order. Rachel quickly paid for the twins' treats, then turned to Alexander with an apologetic look. "Well, we should get going. The boys have homework to finish." "But Mom?" Liam protested. "I wanted to tell him about the dinosaur project." "Another time, sweetheart," Rachel said firmly. Alexander watched as Mark placed a hand on each twin's shoulder, steering them away from the ice cream stand. The gesture was casual but clearly territorial. Ethan went willingly, but Liam looked back over his shoulder, waving with his free hand. "Bye, Mr. Doyle." The sound of his name, his family name, from his son's lips made Alexander's chest tighten. He waved back, noting how Mark's grip on Liam's shoulder tightened slightly. Once they were out of earshot, Alexander slumped against the ice cream stand's counter. The vendor, an elderly man with kind eyes, looked at him sympathetically. "Complicated situation?" "You have no idea," Alexander murmured. He spent the rest of the afternoon walking the beach, replaying every moment of the brief interaction. Liam's natural curiosity, so similar to his own at that age. Ethan's cautious observation, watching and assessing before engaging. The way they moved in sync without seeming to realize it, a dance of shared DNA and mirrored mannerisms. His phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. "Mark's suspicious. We need to be more careful. No contact for a few days." Alexander typed and deleted several responses before settling on a simple, "Understood." He wanted to argue, to demand more time with his sons, but Rachel's warning about doing things her way echoed in his mind. Back at his rental house, Alexander poured himself a scotch and stood on the deck, watching the sun set. His laptop sat open on the dining room table, displaying dozens of unread emails from his company. Usually, such neglect of his business responsibilities would have filled him with anxiety. Now it barely registered compared to the ache of watching his sons walk away with another man's hands on their shoulders. A knock at the door startled him from his thoughts. Opening it, he found himself face to face with Mark Harris. "We need to talk," Mark said, pushing past Alexander into the house. His face was flushed with anger or alcohol, possibly both. "What's your game, Doyle?" "I don't know what you mean," Alexander replied, closing the door slowly. "Don't play dumb. I looked you up. CEO of Doyle Industries, multi-millionaire. What's someone like you doing in Newport, hanging around Rachel and the boys?" Alexander considered his options carefully. The truth was out of the question. That was Rachel's decision to make. But he needed to diffuse Mark's suspicions somehow. "I needed a break," he said finally. "Newport seemed like a good place to get away from everything. Rachel makes good coffee and her sons seem like nice kids, that's all." Mark stepped closer, his breath heavy with the smell of whiskey. "Stay away from them. They don't need some rich guy from New York complicating their lives. They've got everything they need right here." "That sounds like Rachel's decision to make," Alexander said evenly. "Rachel?" Mark laughed bitterly. "I've been there for her and those boys for 10 years. Where were you? Off making your millions? Trust me, she's not interested." The irony of Mark's accusation, so close to the truth yet missing it entirely, almost made Alexander laugh. Instead, he moved to open the door. "I think you should leave, Mr. Harris. You're clearly drunk and this conversation isn't productive." Mark stood his ground for a moment longer, then moved toward the door. "This is your only warning, Doyle. Stay away from my family." After Mark left, Alexander sank onto the couch, his scotch forgotten. His mind raced with the implications of Mark's visit. The man clearly had feelings for Rachel beyond friendship, and his relationship with the twins was deeply entrenched. Any attempt to establish his own relationship with his sons would have to navigate the complexity of Mark's presence in their lives. His phone buzzed again, another text from Rachel. "Mark just left your place. He's angry. What happened?" Alexander stared at the message, wondering how to explain the confrontation without escalating the situation. Finally, he replied, "He's protective of you and the boys. I understand why." Rachel's response came quickly. "He doesn't know about you. Please keep it that way. I'll figure out how to handle this." Alexander set his phone down and walked back out onto the deck. The ocean stretched before him, dark and mysterious in the growing night. Somewhere in Newport, his sons were probably getting ready for bed, their day at the beach already fading into memory. But for Alexander, every moment, Liam's enthusiastic questions, Ethan's watchful gaze, even Mark's protective anger, was etched permanently in his mind. He had glimpsed a world he never knew he wanted to be part of, and now that he had, letting go seemed impossible. The question was, how could he become part of his sons' lives without destroying the stability they'd built with Rachel and Mark? As if in answer, a shooting star streaked across the sky, its brief brilliance reflecting off the dark water. Alexander remembered teaching his business students that every problem had a solution if you were willing to think creatively enough. Now, watching the star's trail fade into darkness, he wondered if some problems were too complex for simple solutions. Rachel stood in her darkened cafe long after closing, wiping the same spot on the counter over and over. The rhythmic motion helped calm her nerves but did nothing to quiet the chaos in her mind. Mark's drunken confrontation with Alexander had shaken her more than she cared to admit. For 11 years, she'd maintained a careful balance in her life, protecting her sons while building something stable and meaningful. Now, in the space of a few days, that balance was crumbling. The bell above the door chimed. Rachel looked up, tensing until she recognized her sister Christina's silhouette. "Thought I'd find you here," Christina said, sliding onto a bar stool. "The boys told me about meeting their new friend from New York today." Rachel's hand stilled on the counter. "Did Mark send you?" "Mark's passed out on his couch." Christina's voice carried a note of disapproval. "Want to tell me what's really going on? Because I haven't seen him this worked up since you turned down his proposal 2 years ago." Rachel abandoned all pretense of cleaning and leaned against the counter. "He's their father, Chris." Christina's sharp intake of breath broke the silence. "Alexander, the business guy from 11 years ago." He recognized them. The resemblance, Rachel's voice cracked. "God, Chris, they look so much like him." "Does he want custody?" "He says he just wants to know them." Rachel ran a hand through her hair. "But you should see him watching them. It's like he's memorizing every detail, trying to make up for all the years he missed." Christina reached across the counter and squeezed her sister's hand. "And you believe him?" "I don't know what to believe." Rachel pulled away, needing to move. She began arranging chairs that were already perfectly aligned. "He's different somehow, still intense, still focused, but there's something else there now. Something almost vulnerable. And Mark is territorial and drunk and making everything more complicated." Rachel slumped against the wall. "He showed up at Alexander's rental house tonight, tried to warn him off. Can you blame him? He's loved those boys like his own since they were babies. And you..." "Don't." Rachel cut her off. "Mark and I tried. It didn't work. He's amazing with the boys, but he's not Alexander?" Christina's voice was gentle. Rachel closed her eyes. "That's not fair. Alexander wasn't there. Mark was. Through chicken pox and nightmares and little league games. Through everything. Then why didn't you marry him when he asked?" The question hung in the air, heavy with unspoken truths. Rachel moved to the cafe's front window, watching waves crash on the moonlit beach. "Because I couldn't give him what he wanted. He wanted us to be this perfect family, wanted to adopt the boys, wanted to erase any trace of their real father. And now their real father is here." "Yeah." Rachel pressed her forehead against the cool glass. "Liam's already asking questions about him. He thinks Alexander is fascinating. This mysterious businessman from New York. And Ethan, you know how he gets when Liam's excited about something. He pretends not to care, but he watches everything." Christina joined her at the window. "You need to tell Mark the truth before this gets out of hand." "I know." Rachel's breath fogged the glass. "But he's going to be hurt and angry, and the boys adore him. I don't want them caught in the middle." "They're already in the middle, Rach. The minute Alexander saw them, everything changed." Rachel turned to face her sister. "What if I'm making a huge mistake? What if I let Alexander into their lives and he leaves again? What if he doesn't? Christina interrupted. What if he's exactly what Liam and Ethan need right now? They're getting older, starting to question things. Maybe it's time they knew the truth. Before Rachel could respond, her phone buzzed with a text. It was from Liam. Mom, Ethan's having bad dreams again. Can you come home? I have to go, Rachel said, already gathering her things. Ethan's nightmares are back. Christina nodded knowingly. He always gets them when he's stressed. He probably picked up on all the tension today. The drive home was short, but it gave Rachel time to think. The small house she'd worked so hard to buy glowed warmly in the darkness. Through the living room window, she could see her son's babysitter, Amy, reading on the couch. Inside, Rachel found Ethan curled up in Liam's bed, both boys wide awake. Liam was telling one of his elaborate stories, something about dinosaurs and time travel, trying to distract his brother. Hey, sweethearts, Rachel said softly, sitting on the edge of the bed. Rough night? Ethan nodded, his face half hidden in the pillow. Liam spoke up. He dreamed about Dad again. Rachel's heart stuttered. What do you mean? The dad we don't know, Liam clarified. Ethan dreamed he came to take us away. Rachel gathered Ethan into her arms, feeling him tremble slightly. Nobody's taking you anywhere, she promised. You're stuck with me forever and ever. And Uncle Mark? Ethan's voice was small. Of course. Rachel stroked his hair, so like Alexander's. Uncle Mark loves you both very much. Then why was he so angry today? Liam asked. At the beach with Mr. Doyle? Rachel chose her words carefully. Sometimes grown-ups get worried about things they don't need to worry about. Uncle Mark just wants to protect us. From what? Liam persisted. Mr. Doyle seems nice. He's been to the dinosaur museum lots of times. Grown-up stuff is complicated sometimes, Rachel hedged. How about I stay here until you both fall asleep? Later, after both boys had drifted off, Rachel sat in her kitchen with a cup of tea gone cold. Her phone displayed an unanswered text from Alexander. I'm sorry about Mark. Tell me how to make this easier. The simple question had no simple answer. Every path forward seemed fraught with potential pain. For the twins, for Mark, for herself. Even for Alexander, who was discovering what it meant to be a father 11 years too late. Another text came through, this one from Mark. Sorry about earlier. Can we talk tomorrow? Rachel set her phone aside without answering either message. Through the kitchen window, she could see the ocean, its waves reflecting moonlight like scattered diamonds. Somewhere out there, Alexander was probably looking at the same view, wondering about the sons he'd just discovered. And here she was, caught between the man who'd helped raise her children and the man who'd helped create them. Between the stability she'd built and the truth she'd hidden. Between what was safe and what was right. Her tea had grown completely cold when she finally picked up her phone again. She typed a message to Alexander. Meet me at the cafe before opening tomorrow, 5 a.m. We need to figure this out. His response was immediate. I'll be there. To Mark, she wrote, Yes, we can talk, but I need you to listen, really listen. There's something you need to know. Setting her phone down, Rachel walked to the boys' room and stood in the doorway. They'd both migrated to Liam's bed, tangled together like they used to sleep as toddlers. In sleep, their resemblance to Alexander was even more striking. The same straight nose, the same stubborn set to their jaws. She'd protected them for so long, built walls around their little family to keep out anything that might hurt them. But walls, she was learning, could also keep out things that might heal, things that might complete them. Tomorrow would bring hard conversations and harder choices. But watching her sons sleep, Rachel knew one thing with absolute certainty. Whatever happened next had to be about them. Their needs, their hearts, their futures. Everything else, her fears, Mark's feelings, even Alexander's desires, had to come second. The truth was coming, ready or not. All she could do now was try to shape how it landed. The pre-dawn darkness wrapped around Bennett's place like a shroud as Alexander pulled into the empty parking lot. Rachel's car was already there, a solitary figure visible through the cafe windows. His watch read 4:55 a.m. Early, even by his standards, but sleep had proved elusive anyway. Inside, Rachel was going through the motions of opening, her movements automatic after years of routine. She didn't look up when Alexander entered, just said, "Coffee's almost ready." "Thanks." He settled onto a bar stool, watching her work. In the harsh fluorescent lights, he could see the shadows under her eyes, the slight tremor in her hands as she measured coffee grounds. "Ethan had nightmares last night," she said finally, still focused on the coffee maker. "About his unknown father coming to take them away." The words hit Alexander like physical blows. "Rachel, I would never—" "I know." She turned to face him, leaning against the counter. "But they're picking up on all this tension. Mark's anger, my anxiety, this strange new man who keeps appearing in their lives. They're smart boys, Alexander. They sense something's happening. Then maybe it's time to tell them the truth." "Maybe." Rachel poured 2 cups of coffee, sliding one toward him. "But first, we need to deal with Mark." Alexander wrapped his hands around the warm mug. "He came to my house drunk last night." "I know. He's scared." Rachel's voice softened. "He's been there for everything. First steps, first words, first day of school. He taught them to ride bikes, helped them with homework, checked for monsters under their beds. In his mind, he's their father in every way that matters." "Except he's not," Alexander said quietly. "No, he's not. But he loves them, and they love him." Rachel took a deep breath. "I'm telling him the truth today. He deserves to hear it from me." Alexander nodded slowly. "Do you want me to be there?" "God, no, that would be a disaster." Rachel ran a hand through her hair. "But I need you to understand something. When I tell him he's going to be hurt and angry, he might try to turn the boys against you, might make scenes like yesterday. I need to know you can handle that with grace. These are my son's lives we're dealing with, not a corporate takeover." "I understand." Alexander stared into his coffee. "But Rachel, they're my sons too. I've missed so much already. I can't just stand back and—" "You can and you will," Rachel cut in firmly. "Because if you push too hard, if you try to rush this, you'll damage any chance of having a real relationship with them. They need to trust you, to want you in their lives. That takes time." "How much time?" "As much as they need." Rachel's voice was gentle but unyielding. "This isn't about you, Alexander, or me or Mark. It's about 2 10-year-old boys who are about to have their world turned upside down." The truth of her words settled over them both. Outside, the sky was beginning to lighten, the first hints of dawn painting the ocean in shades of gray and pink. "Tell me about them," Alexander said suddenly. "Not just what I can observe. Really tell me about them." A small smile touched Rachel's lips. "Liam's the dreamer. He lives in his own world half the time, full of dinosaurs and space adventures and wild theories about everything. But he's also incredibly perceptive about people's feelings. He always knows when Ethan's upset, even before I do. And Ethan? Watchful, analytical. He plans everything, worries about everything. But when he truly lets his guard down, when he really trusts someone—" Rachel's voice caught. "He has the biggest heart of anyone I've ever known." Alexander absorbed this, filing away each detail like precious gems. "They're so different yet so alike." "Like 2 sides of the same coin," Rachel agreed. "They balance each other perfectly." She glanced at the clock. "I need to start getting ready for opening, and you should go. Mark usually stops by for coffee before work." Alexander stood but hesitated. "When will you tell him?" "Tonight, after the boys are in bed." Rachel's hands tightened around her coffee cup. "I'll text you afterward, let you know how it went." "Be careful," Alexander said softly. "He was pretty drunk last night." "Mark would never hurt me." Rachel's voice was certain. "He'll be angry, hurt, probably say things he doesn't mean, but he's not violent." The bell above the door chimed before Alexander could respond. They both turned to see Mark standing in the doorway, his expression darkening as he took in the scene. "Well," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Isn't this cozy?" Rachel straightened. "Mark, you're early." "Clearly not early enough." His eyes fixed on Alexander. "I thought I made myself clear last night." "Mark, stop." Rachel moved out from behind the counter. "Alexander was just leaving." "Was he?" Mark stepped further into the cafe. "Funny how he keeps showing up everywhere these days. Coffee shop, beach, private early morning meetings." Alexander set his coffee cup down carefully. "This isn't what you think." "No?" Mark's laugh was bitter. "Then what is it?" "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like some rich guy from New York thinks he can walk in and disrupt our lives." "Mark, please," Rachel tried again. "We need to talk, but not here, not now." "Why not now?" Mark's voice rose. "What are you hiding, Rachel?" "Because something's been off ever since he showed up. The secretive texts, the mysterious meetings, the way you look at the boys when you think no one's watching." Rachel paled. "Mark." "Oh God." Mark stumbled back slightly. "The boys, that's what this is about, isn't it? That's why he's really here." He turned to Alexander, rage and realization warring in his expression. "You're their father." The silence that followed was deafening. Rachel moved toward Mark, reaching for his arm, but he jerked away. "How long have you known he was here?" he demanded. "How long have you been lying to me?" "A few days," Rachel whispered. "I was going to tell you tonight." "Tonight," Mark repeated mockingly. "After years of letting me love them like—" He broke off, running his hands through his hair. "I need to get out of here." "Mark, wait," Rachel called after him, but he was already gone, the door slamming behind him. Alexander started to speak, but Rachel held up a hand. "Don't. Just don't. I need to deal with this. Please leave." He wanted to argue, to help somehow, but the look in her eyes stopped him. This was her life he'd disrupted, her carefully constructed world he'd shaken. The least he could do was respect her wishes now. Outside, the sun had fully risen, painting Newport in morning gold. Alexander could hear the first stirrings of the town coming to life. Delivery trucks making their rounds, early joggers on the beach, birds calling to each other across the brightening sky. Everything looked exactly the same as it had yesterday, but nothing was the same at all. His phone buzzed, a message from his office about an urgent situation requiring his attention. For the first time in his career, Alexander ignored it completely. Instead, he walked down to the beach, watching the waves and thinking about two boys who carried his DNA, his features, his mannerisms, yet were entirely their own people, shaped by years of love from Rachel and, yes, from Mark. The truth was out now, raw and messy and impossible to ignore. The only question was, what would everyone do with it? The next 48 hours unfolded like a slow-motion earthquake. Mark hadn't returned any of Rachel's calls or texts, and his absence was felt acutely, especially by the twins. At breakfast, 2 days after the confrontation, Liam pushed his cereal around listlessly while Ethan stared out the kitchen window. "Why hasn't Uncle Mark come over?" Liam finally asked. "He always comes over on Wednesdays for pancakes." Rachel set down the lunch bag she'd been packing. "Uncle Mark needs some time to himself right now." "Because of Mr. Doyle?" Ethan's voice was quiet but penetrating. He'd turned from the window, fixing his mother with the kind of intense gaze that sometimes made her wonder if he could see right through her. "What makes you say that?" Rachel asked carefully. "Uncle Mark got mad when Mr. Doyle was talking to us at the beach," Ethan said, "and now he's gone." "He's not gone," Rachel assured them quickly. "He just needs a few days to sort some things out." "Is it because Mr. Doyle looks like us?" Liam blurted out. Rachel froze. The spoon she'd been holding clattered against the counter. "What do you mean?" "I saw a picture of him in the newspaper website," Liam explained. "When I Googled him, he runs a big company in New York, and Ethan says he has the same nose as us, and his hair does the weird flippy thing in front like mine does." Rachel sank into a kitchen chair, her legs suddenly weak. Of course they'd noticed. They were her brilliant, observant boys. How could they not have seen what was so glaringly obvious? Mom? Ethan had moved closer, his face worried. Are you okay? We need to talk, Rachel said softly. Both of you sit down. The boys exchanged glances before taking seats at the table. Rachel could see the questions burning in their eyes, the theories probably already forming in their active minds. You're right about Mr. Doyle, she began, then stopped. How did one even begin this conversation? The reason he looks like you is because… Her phone buzzed loudly, making them all jump. It was Christina. Turn on the news, the text read. Channel 7, now. Rachel grabbed the remote with trembling hands. The local morning news filled the screen and her heart stopped. There was Mark, clearly drunk, being led away from Alexander's rental house in handcuffs, while police photographed a broken window. Uncle Mark, Liam exclaimed, but Ethan shushed him, leaning forward to hear the reporter. Arrested for vandalism and disturbing the peace after allegedly breaking into the vacation home of New York CEO Alexander Doyle. Sources say Mr. Harris had been drinking and was shouting about family obligations before throwing a rock through the front window. Rachel muted the TV, her mind racing. Boys, get your backpacks, we need to leave for school. But Mom… They both started to protest. Now, Rachel said firmly. We'll talk more later, I promise. The drive to school was tense with unasked questions. Rachel could see Liam texting furiously in the back seat, probably updating his friends about what he'd seen on TV. Ethan just stared out the window, his face unreadable. After dropping them off, Rachel drove straight to the police station. She found Alexander already there talking to an officer. I'm not pressing charges, he was saying as she approached. It was a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding that involved property damage, the officer replied, and his blood alcohol level was well over the legal limit. Please, Rachel interjected. He's never done anything like this before, he's just going through something difficult. The officer looked between them, clearly sensing more to the story. Mr. Harris will need to stay until he's sober, but if Mr. Doyle doesn't want to press charges… I don't, Alexander confirmed. 2 hours later, Mark sat in a conference room at the police station, looking considerably worse for wear. Rachel and Alexander sat across from him, an uncomfortable triangle of tension. I'm sorry, Mark said finally, his voice rough. About the window, I'll pay for it. That's not important, Alexander replied. What's important is that this needs to stop, for the boys' sake. Mark's laugh was hollow. The boys. Right. Your sons. Yes, my sons, Alexander said quietly. But also the children you've helped raise for 10 years. The children who love you and need you to be better than this. They saw you on the news this morning, Rachel added softly. Mark's face crumpled. God, Rachel, I'm so sorry. Everything I've built, everything I thought I had. You haven't lost anything, Rachel insisted. The boys still need you in their lives. That hasn't changed. Hasn't it? Mark looked at Alexander. You're here now. Their real father, the successful businessman. How long before they prefer you? It's not a competition, Alexander said. They need all of us. Different relationships, different roles, but all important. Rachel touched Mark's hand tentatively. The boys were asking about you this morning. They missed their Uncle Mark, the man who taught them to ride bikes and checks for monsters under the bed. That's still you. They're starting to figure it out, she continued. About Alexander. They've noticed the resemblance. I was about to tell them this morning when… She gestured vaguely at their current situation. Mark ran his hands over his face. How do we do this? How do we explain everything? Together, Alexander said firmly, as adults who all want what's best for Liam and Ethan. The sound of their names seemed to steady Mark. He straightened slightly, some of his usual composure returning. I need time, he said, to process everything, to figure out my place in all this. Of course, Rachel agreed, but no more drinking, no more scenes. The boys need stability right now more than ever. As they left the police station, Rachel's phone buzzed with a text from Christina. "The boys are fine. Picked them up from school early. They're at my house asking about a million questions." Rachel showed the message to both men. "I need to go talk to them," she said. "They've waited long enough for the truth." "Do you want us there?" Alexander asked. Rachel considered for a moment. "No. Let me explain everything first. Then we'll figure out the next steps together." She found the twins in Christina's backyard, half-heartedly throwing a baseball back and forth. They stopped when they saw her, and Rachel's heart ached at the uncertainty in their faces. "Mr. Doyle is our father, isn't he?" Ethan asked before she could speak. Direct and analytical, just like Alexander. Rachel nodded slowly. "Yes, he is." "Is that why Uncle Mark is so angry?" Liam added, moving closer to his brother. "It's complicated," Rachel began, then stopped herself. "They deserved better than platitudes." "Yes, that's part of it. Uncle Mark loves you both very much, and he's scared of things changing." "Are they going to change?" Ethan's voice wavered slightly. Rachel opened her arms, and both boys moved into her embrace. They were getting so tall, she realized. Soon they'd be too big for this. "Some things will change," she said honestly. "But the important things, how much you're loved, how special you are, those will never change." "Does Mr. Doyle, Dad, does he want to know us?" Liam asked against her shoulder. "Very much," Rachel assured them. "He just found out about you, and he wants to be part of your lives. But only if you want that too, and only at a pace that feels right for you. And Uncle Mark?" Ethan pulled back slightly to look at her face. "Will always be Uncle Mark. He just needs a little time to adjust, but he loves you just as much as always." The boys absorbed this, communicating silently in that twin way of theirs. Finally, Liam spoke again. "Can we meet him? Like, really meet him? Not just at the beach or the cafe?" Rachel kissed the top of his head. "Yes, when you're ready." "I'm ready now," Liam declared, while Ethan nodded more hesitantly. Rachel pulled out her phone, her heart both heavy and hopeful as she typed a message to Alexander. "They know. They want to meet you. Really meet you. Tomorrow?" His response came instantly. "Name the time and place. I'll be there." Alexander arrived at the Newport Public Library 30 minutes early, pacing between the stacks of children's books. Rachel had chosen this location carefully. Neutral ground, public but quiet, with plenty of material to break the ice if conversation stalled. He'd spent the morning in a state of controlled panic, changing his clothes 3 times before settling on casual slacks and a blue button-down shirt. In his pocket, he carried 2 small boxes. He'd had them overnight shipped from his New York apartment after Rachel confirmed the meeting. Inside each was a compass, antique brass pieces that his own father had given him when he was around the twins' age. He'd kept them all these years, never quite sure why. Now, finally, he understood. At exactly 3 o'clock, he heard them before he saw them. Liam's excited whisper carried through the quiet library. "There he is." Alexander turned to find Rachel and the boys standing at the end of the aisle. Liam was practically bouncing with nervous energy, while Ethan pressed close to his mother's side, his expression guarded but curious. "Hi," Alexander said softly, his carefully prepared speech evaporating at the sight of them. Rachel gave the boys a gentle push forward. "We'll start with an hour," she said. "I'll be right over there if you need me." She gestured to a reading area visible through the shelves before retreating, leaving Alexander alone with his sons. Liam broke the silence first. "Mom says you're our father." "Yes," Alexander replied, his throat tight. "I am." "Why didn't you know about us before?" Ethan's question was direct, his eyes, so like Alexander's own, searching for truth. Alexander gestured to a nearby table. "Maybe we should sit down?" Once they were settled, he continued. "Your mother and I knew each other very briefly, 11 years ago. I left town before she knew she was pregnant with you. She made a choice to raise you on her own, and looking back I understand why." "Because you were busy being a CEO?" Liam asked. Because I wasn't ready to be a father then, Alexander corrected gently. I was very focused on my career. I wouldn't have been the kind of father you deserved. And now? Ethan's voice was quiet but intense. Alexander met his gaze steadily. Now I want to know you. Both of you. If you'll let me. Liam leaned forward eagerly. What's it like in New York? Do you really have an office at the top of a building? Have you been to all the museums? A small smile touched Alexander's lips. Yes, to all of those. But I'd rather hear about you. Your mother tells me you're interested in dinosaurs? For the next 20 minutes, Liam enthusiastically detailed his latest dinosaur theories, while Ethan listened silently, watching Alexander's reactions. When Liam paused for breath, Alexander turned to his quieter son. And what about you, Ethan? What are you interested in? Ethan hesitated before answering. I like puzzles and maps. I want to know how things work, where they go. Alexander's heart jumped at the familiar sentiment. He reached into his pocket, withdrawing the 2 small boxes. I brought something for you both. If that's okay? At their nods, he slid the boxes across the table. The boys opened them simultaneously, another twin moment that fascinated him. Whoa, Liam breathed, lifting out the compass. It's old. It was mine when I was your age, Alexander explained. My father gave it to me when he taught me about navigation. I thought, maybe I could teach you too. Ethan was examining his compass carefully, turning it over in his hands. These aren't just decorative, he observed. They're real navigation instruments. Yes, they are. They're different from modern compasses. These require more skill to use properly. But once you understand them, they can tell you more than just direction. They can help you understand your position in the world. Like GPS coordinates? Ethan asked, interest flickering in his eyes. Similar principle, but more hands-on. Would you like to learn? Both boys nodded, and Alexander spent the next 15 minutes explaining the basic principles of compass navigation. Ethan absorbed every detail, asking precise questions that showed his quick understanding. Liam was more interested in the compass's history, wanting to know about Alexander's father and what he was like as a kid. Did you look like us when you were our age? Liam asked. Alexander pulled out his phone, finding the photo he'd digitized years ago. Himself at 10, holding a compass on a beach much like Newport's. The boys leaned in to look, their own features reflected in the past. That's weird, Ethan murmured, like looking in a mirror, but old. Thanks, Alexander said dryly, and was rewarded with Ethan's first real smile of the afternoon. Do you have more pictures? Liam asked eagerly. From when you were young? Some. They're mostly in New York, but I could have them sent here. Could we? Liam glanced at his brother before continuing. Could we come to New York sometime to see where you live? Alexander's heart soared at the question, but he kept his voice measured. That would be up to your mother, but I'd love to show you New York someday. What about Uncle Mark? Ethan asked suddenly. Mom says he's still our uncle, but he is, Alexander assured him quickly. Uncle Mark loves you very much. Nothing changes that. But he got arrested, Ethan persisted, because of you. Alexander chose his words carefully. Uncle Mark was upset because he cares about you and your mother very much. He's worried about things changing. But what happened wasn't about you. It was about grown-ups not handling their feelings well. Like when Liam threw his book at the wall because he was mad about his math test. Hey, Liam protested, but Alexander nodded. Similar idea. Sometimes even adults need to learn better ways to handle big feelings. Rachel appeared at the end of the aisle, signaling that their hour was almost up. Alexander felt a pang of regret. There was still so much to say, so much to learn about these remarkable boys who carried his DNA. Before you go, he said quickly, I want you to know something. I might have missed the first 10 years of your lives, but I'm here now. Whatever you need, whenever you need it, I'm here. We can take this as slow as you want, but I'm not going anywhere. Liam surprised him by launching forward for a hug. Alexander froze for a moment before carefully wrapping his arms around his son. Over Liam's shoulder, he watched Ethan struggle with the desire to do the same. "It's okay," Alexander said softly. "No pressure. We have time." Ethan nodded, clutching his compass tightly. "Thank you," he whispered. "For this." Rachel approached then, and Alexander reluctantly released Liam. "Why don't you boys go check out some books while I talk to your father for a minute?" Once the twins were out of earshot, Rachel spoke quietly. "They haven't stopped talking about meeting you since yesterday. Liam's already planning trips to New York in his head. I told him that would be your decision," Alexander assured her. "I know you handled everything really well." She watched as the boys browsed the shelves, Liam animatedly pointing out books while Ethan considered each option carefully. The compasses were a nice touch. "They were sitting in my apartment for years. I never knew why I kept them until now." Rachel's expression softened. "They're going to have questions. Lots of them. And some days will be harder than others. Ethan especially. He takes time to trust." "I'm prepared for that," Alexander said. "I meant what I said to them. I'm not going anywhere." "Good." Rachel turned to face him fully. "Because if you hurt them, I won't." Alexander's voice was firm. "I've missed too much already. I won't miss any more." The boys returned then, arms full of books. Liam had chosen several on dinosaurs, while Ethan clutched a book about celestial navigation and another about puzzle solving. "Can we show him the library garden?" Liam asked Rachel. "Just for a minute?" Rachel checked her watch. "A quick look. Then we need to get home for dinner." The garden was small but well-maintained, with benches arranged around a central fountain. Liam immediately launched into an explanation of how the fountain reminded him of a specific dinosaur era, while Ethan quietly showed Alexander how his compass worked in relation to the garden's layout. Standing there in the late afternoon sun, watching his sons share their interests and personalities with him, Alexander felt something shift inside his chest. The endless drive for success, the constant need to achieve and acquire. It all seemed somehow less important than this moment, than these two boys who were parts of himself made new and wonderful. As they said goodbye, Liam hugged him again, and this time Ethan managed a quick, tentative embrace as well. Alexander watched them leave with Rachel, their new compasses carefully stowed in their pockets, their voices animated as they discussed the afternoon's events. He sat alone in the garden for a long time afterward, listening to the fountain and thinking about navigation, not just with compasses, but through life. He'd spent decades thinking he knew exactly where he was going, only to discover he'd been reading the wrong map entirely. Now, with two young guides he never knew he needed, he was finally finding his true north. The following week unfolded in a series of cautious steps forward and occasional steps back. Alexander found himself navigating an intricate dance of scheduled visits and impromptu encounters, each interaction with the twins carefully balanced against Rachel's protective instincts and Mark's fragile acceptance of the new reality. On Wednesday morning, Alexander sat in his rental house reviewing urgent business emails when his phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. "Liam's school called. He's in the nurse's office with a fever. I'm swamped at the cafe, and Mark's with a client. Could you?" His heart leaped at the implied trust in her request. "Of course. Send me the school details." 20 minutes later, Alexander walked into Newport Elementary's front office, feeling oddly nervous. The secretary looked up expectantly. "I'm here for Liam Bennett," he said. "I'm his..." He hesitated for a fraction of a second. "Father?" The word felt both foreign and right on his tongue. The secretary checked her computer. "Yes, Ms. Bennett called to authorize you. If you'll just sign here." He found Liam curled up on a cot in the nurse's office, his usually animated face flushed with fever. The boy's eyes widened in surprise when he saw Alexander. "Dad?" The word came out uncertain, testing. "Your mom's busy at the cafe," Alexander explained softly. "Is it okay if I take you home?" Liam nodded, then winced at the movement. My head hurts. Alexander helped him gather his things, noting how small and vulnerable his son looked. In their previous meetings, Liam had been all energy and enthusiasm. This quieter, needier version tugged at something deep in Alexander's chest. "Where's Ethan?" he asked as they walked to his car. "He has advanced math during my history class," Liam explained tiredly. "Mom says we need some time apart during school so we don't just rely on each other." Alexander helped him into the passenger seat, remembering Rachel's words about the twins' different strengths. "Does that bother you? Being separated?" Liam considered this as they pulled out of the school parking lot. "Sometimes, but Ethan really likes math and I like having my own friends in history. We're different even though we're twins." "I've noticed that," Alexander said carefully. "You seem to approach things differently. Mom says I'm more like her, always talking, always dreaming up stories. And Ethan—" Liam paused, looking at Alexander curiously. "Ethan's more like you. He likes to figure things out, make plans." Alexander absorbed this insight as they drove to Rachel's house. She'd texted him the garage code and told him where to find the spare key. Inside, he helped Liam settle on the living room couch with water, fever medicine, and the TV remote. "Can you stay?" Liam asked as Alexander tucked a blanket around him. "Just for a little while?" "Of course." Alexander sat in the adjacent armchair, taking in the room's details. Family photos covered the walls, the twins through various ages, always together, often with Rachel or Mark in the frame. His chest tightened at all the moments he'd missed. "That's from our 8th birthday," Liam said, noticing his gaze on a particular photo. "Uncle Mark built us a treehouse in Aunt Christina's backyard, but then it rained so we had the party inside instead." Alexander studied the image, his son's, slightly younger but still unmistakably his, blowing out candles while Mark beamed in the background. "Uncle Mark's been there for a lot of important moments, hasn't he?" Liam nodded, then looked worried. "Is that okay?" "More than okay," Alexander assured him quickly. "I'm glad you and Ethan had him. Still have him." "He hasn't come over much lately," Liam said quietly. "Not since, you know." "That's probably my fault," Alexander admitted. "Sometimes it's hard for grown-ups to adjust to changes, even good ones. Like how Ethan always gets quiet when things change, even if they're good changes." Alexander smiled at the comparison. "Exactly like that." They fell into comfortable silence, Liam drifting in and out of sleep while a nature documentary played softly on TV. Alexander used the time to send emails reorganizing his schedule, pushing meetings back and delegating what he could. His assistant's response was diplomatic but concerned. "The board is asking questions about your extended absence." He was composing a reply when he heard a key in the front door. Mark stepped inside, then froze at the sight of Alexander. "Rachel asked me to pick up Liam," Mark said stiffly. "I didn't know you were here." "Dad picked me up," Liam mumbled sleepily from the couch. "My head hurts." Something flickered across Mark's face at Liam's casual use of Dad. He moved into the living room, crouching beside the couch to feel Liam's forehead. "You're pretty warm, buddy. Have you taken any medicine?" "Dad gave me some when we got home." Mark's jaw tightened, but his voice remained gentle. "Good. Why don't you try to sleep for a bit?" Alexander stood, gathering his laptop. "I should go. Rachel knows you're here." "Yes," Mark replied shortly. Then, with visible effort, he added, "Thanks for picking him up." Alexander nodded, turning to Liam. "Feel better, okay? Text me if you need anything." "'Kay," Liam murmured, already half asleep. "Love you, Dad." "Love you, Uncle Mark." Both men stared at the boy, then at each other. The simple phrase, delivered with a child's uncomplicated affection, seemed to deflate some of the tension between them. "He has enough room in his heart for both of us," Alexander said quietly. Mark ran a hand through his hair. "Yeah, well, he's always been generous that way, him and Ethan both." "Look, Mark." "Don't," Mark cut him off. "Just, not yet. I'm trying, okay? For them, but I'm not ready to be friends." Alexander nodded, understanding. At the door, he paused. For what it's worth, I'm grateful for everything you've done for them. Everything you're still doing. Mark's only response was a short nod, but as Alexander walked to his car, he heard the other man's voice floating through the open window, soft and familiar as he hummed an old lullaby to Liam. That evening, Alexander's phone lit up with texts. From Rachel. Thank you for today. How was he? From Ethan. Is Liam okay? He wasn't in carpool. From Liam. The medicine helped. Can you come to my baseball game Saturday? Ethan's playing too. The last message included a photo. Liam and Ethan in baseball uniforms, grinning at the camera. Mark stood behind them in a coach's jersey, and Alexander realized with a start that this would be his first time seeing his sons play sports. Wouldn't miss it, he replied to Liam, then added to Rachel, Is that okay? Her response came quickly. Yes. Mark's coaching, but he says he can handle it if you're there. Just maybe sit on the opposite side of the bleachers. Alexander agreed, then spent the next hour researching baseball rules. He'd played briefly as a child, but had forgotten most of the details. If he was going to watch his sons play, he wanted to understand exactly what was happening. Later, unable to sleep, he walked down to the beach. The moon was full, casting enough light to see the waves rolling in. He pulled out his phone and opened the photo of the twins in their baseball uniforms. Their faces glowed with happiness, with belonging, with the security of being loved. Looking at the image, Alexander realized something profound. He wasn't trying to insert himself into their lives anymore. Instead, he was being invited in, one small moment at a time. Each dad, each shared secret, each casual love you was a gift, unearned but freely given, complex but beautifully simple. The waves continued their eternal rhythm, reminding him of the compasses he'd given the twins. Navigation wasn't just about finding your way, he realized. Sometimes it was about learning to move with the tides, understanding that the journey was just as important as the destination. His phone buzzed one last time. Ethan, surprising him with a late message. Liam says you're coming to the game. I'm pitching. Will you watch? Alexander's throat tightened as he typed back, I'll watch every minute. Promise. And he meant it, with every fiber of his being. Saturday morning dawned clear and crisp. Perfect baseball weather. Alexander arrived at the Newport Little League field 45 minutes early, thermos of coffee in hand. He'd barely slept, spending most of the night watching baseball tutorials online and memorizing basic rules and terminology. The field was already busy with early arrivals. Parents set up chairs along the baselines while kids warmed up, their chatter and laughter filling the morning air. Alexander found a spot on the visitors' bleachers as promised, and watched Mark organizing the home team's dugout. His sons arrived with Rachel 10 minutes later, both wearing Newport Sharks uniforms. Ethan immediately joined the pitchers warming up, his movements precise and focused. Liam, still slightly pale from his recent fever but determined to play, bounced between practice swings and animated conversations with teammates. First time? Alexander turned to find Christina settling onto the bleacher beside him, 2 coffee cups in her hands. She offered him one. Rachel mentioned you might need moral support. That obvious, huh? Christina smiled. You have that first-time parent at a game look, like you might throw up or cry or both. Is there a third option? Afraid not. She took a sip of her coffee. Fair warning, Mark gets intense during games. He's a good coach, but he takes it seriously. As if on cue, Mark's voice carried across the field. All right, Sharks, infield practice, let's go. Alexander watched as Ethan took the pitcher's mound, his expression eerily similar to the one Alexander wore during important business presentations. Liam jogged to his position at second base, all nervous energy and determination. They're good, Christina said softly. Ethan's probably the best pitcher in the league, and Liam, well, what he lacks in natural talent, he makes up for in enthusiasm. The opposing team arrived, filling the other dugout with royal blue uniforms. Parents shifted to their respective sides, creating an invisible line down the middle of the spectator area. Alexander felt the energy change as game time approached. Play ball, the umpire finally called, and Alexander's heart jumped as Ethan took the mound for the first inning. His first pitch was a perfect strike right down the middle. Mark's approving nod from the dugout spoke volumes. 2 more strikes followed, and just like that, Ethan had his first strikeout. He's actually better when he's nervous, Christina commented. Channels it into focus just like I do, Alexander finished quietly. The inning continued with Ethan's steady pitching and the Sharks' solid defense. When Liam scooped up a ground ball and made a clean throw to first for the 3rd out, Alexander found himself on his feet cheering with the other parents. The bottom of the inning brought the Sharks up to bat. Liam was second in the lineup, bouncing on his toes as he waited his turn. His swing was less polished than Ethan's pitching, but he made contact, sending a bouncing single between first and second base. "That's my boy," Mark's proud voice carried from the coaching box at first base. "Good eye, Liam." Alexander felt a brief stab of jealousy at the easy way Mark coached and encouraged his son. But then Liam, standing on first base, turned and waved excitedly at both dugout and bleachers, his smile including everyone in his triumph. The game progressed with the kind of drama only Little League can produce. Ethan pitched 4 solid innings before moving to shortstop, his arm tired but his head still in the game. Liam had another hit and made a surprising catch on a line drive, earning cheers from both sides of the bleachers. In the bottom of the 6th, the final inning, the Sharks were down by 1 run with 2 outs and runners on second and third. Liam stepped up to bat, his earlier confidence somewhat shaken by a strikeout in his last at-bat. Alexander could see Mark debating whether to put in a pinch hitter. The game was on the line and Liam was clearly nervous. But after a moment's hesitation, Mark called time and walked to home plate. From his spot in the bleachers, Alexander couldn't hear what Mark said to Liam, but he saw his son's shoulders straighten, saw the determined nod that followed. When Mark returned to the coaching box, Liam settled into his batting stance with renewed purpose. The first pitch was a ball. The second, a called strike that looked a bit high. Liam fouled off the 3rd pitch, sending parents scrambling for cover as the ball sailed into the bleachers. "Come on, Liam," Alexander whispered. Beside him, Christina crossed her fingers. The next pitch came in fast, but Liam was ready. The crack of bat-meeting ball echoed across the field. The ball sailed over the second baseman's head, dropping into the outfield grass. Both runners scored easily as Liam ran hard to second base, sliding in just ahead of the throw. The Sharks' dugout erupted. Players poured onto the field, mobbing Liam as he stood, uniform now covered in dirt from his slide. Through the celebration, Alexander watched as Ethan broke away from the group to retrieve the game ball from the umpire. Later, as families began packing up chairs and collecting equipment, Ethan approached Alexander in the bleachers, Liam trailing behind him. "We have something for you," Ethan said, his voice carrying that formal tone he used when nervous. He held out the game ball, now covered in signatures. "The whole team signed it. For your first game." Alexander took the ball carefully, reading the messy signatures of elementary school players. In the center, in Ethan's precise handwriting, "Dad's first game. Sharks versus Eagles, October 2024. "Turn it over," Liam urged. On the other side, 2 signatures stood out. Ethan Doyle and Liam Doyle. Alexander looked up sharply. The boys had always used Bennett as their last name. "Mom said we could," Liam explained quickly. "If we wanted to, for baseball stuff." "And you wanted to?" Ethan nodded slowly. "We talked about it. A lot. Mom says names are important because they tell people who you are and where you come from." "And we come from both," Liam added. "Bennett and Doyle." Alexander stared at the signatures, his vision blurring slightly. "Thank you," he managed. "This means thank you." A call from the dugout interrupted the moment. Mark needed help cleaning up. The boys ran off, leaving Alexander holding the baseball like it was made of gold. Rachel appeared beside him, watching their sons help Mark collect equipment. "They've been planning that all week," she said softly. "The signatures, the names, and it was their idea." "Rachel, I know." She touched his arm briefly. "They're choosing to let you in, Alexander. Really let you in. Don't waste it." Never, he promised. As they walked to the parking lot, Alexander noticed Mark watching him. The other man gave him a short nod, not quite acceptance, but something close to understanding. That evening, Alexander placed the baseball carefully on his rental house mantel. His phone buzzed with a series of texts. From Liam. Did you see my hit? From Ethan. Next game is Tuesday. My pitching was off in the 4th inning. Can we practice before then? From Rachel. They haven't stopped talking about you being there. Thank you for making this work. He responded to each message, then sent one more to Mark. You're a great coach. They're lucky to have you. The response came hours later, just 2 words. They're luckier. Alexander smiled, understanding what Mark meant. The boys were lucky to have both of them, the father who had loved them from the beginning and the father who was learning to love them now. Different roles, different histories, but the same goal. 2 boys' happiness. The game ball caught the last rays of sunset, the signatures glowing gold in the fading light. Alexander traced the letters of his sons' names. Both names, Bennett and Doyle, past and present combined into something new and precious. They were choosing to let him in, as Rachel had said, not just into their lives, but into their identities, their futures, their stories. It wasn't the beginning of their story. He'd missed that part. But maybe, just maybe, it was the beginning of a new chapter. 3 weeks after the baseball game, Alexander sat in his Manhattan office staring at the proposal his board had sent over. They wanted him back full-time, suggesting his sabbatical had gone on long enough. The document outlined a reorganization plan that would require his constant presence in New York for at least the next 6 months. His phone lit up with a video call from Ethan. These had become regular occurrences, Ethan showing him complicated puzzles or math problems, seeking validation for solutions he'd already figured out but wanted to share. Alexander smiled as he accepted the call. Dad. Ethan's face filled the screen, excitement breaking through his usual reserve. I solved the celestial navigation problem you sent. Want to see? Of course. Alexander shifted his laptop screen, the board's proposal forgotten. Show me what you figured out. Ethan held up several pages of careful calculations, walking through his process with the precision of a much older student. Alexander found himself nodding along, pride swelling in his chest at his son's natural aptitude for complex problems. That's exactly right, he confirmed when Ethan finished. You might be better at this than I was at your age. Ethan beamed at the praise, then his expression turned serious. When are you coming back? Liam's got a solo in the school concert next week, and I'm entering the state math competition. Alexander's chest tightened. He'd been commuting between Newport and New York for the past 2 weeks, trying to balance his company responsibilities with his growing role in his son's lives. But the board's proposal made it clear that arrangement wasn't sustainable. I'm working on something, he said carefully, a way to spend more time in Newport. But it's complicated. Because of your company? Partly. Alexander studied his son's face, so much like his own. How would you feel about me being around more permanently? You mean living here? Ethan's eyes widened. In Newport? Maybe. Would that be okay? Ethan was quiet for a moment, processing. What about Uncle Mark? The question revealed so much about his son's careful nature, his concern for others' feelings. Uncle Mark will always be important in your life, Alexander assured him. This isn't about replacing anyone. I know. Ethan fidgeted with his compass. He carried it constantly now. It's just, everything's different now, good different mostly, but sometimes I worry. About what? That it might change again. That you might leave. The words came out in a rush, as if Ethan had been holding them back for weeks. Alexander's heart clenched. Ethan, look at me. He waited until his son's eyes met his through the screen. I'm not leaving. Ever. The only thing I'm trying to figure out is how to be here more, not less. Promise? I promise. Alexander held up his hand, showing his own compass that he'd started carrying. Navigation rule number 1. Always know where your true north is. You and Liam are my true north now. Ethan smiled slightly at the reference to their shared interest. Mom says you have a meeting with your company board next week. News travels fast, Alexander observed dryly. Liam overheard Mom talking to Aunt Christina. Ethan shrugged. He tells me everything. The board wants me to come back to New York full-time, Alexander admitted. But I'm going to propose something different. A restructuring that would let me work primarily from Newport, with just occasional trips to New York. Would that work? It can if I make it work. Alexander's voice carried the same determination he used in major business negotiations. Some things are more important than traditional corporate structure. Their conversation was interrupted by Liam's voice off-screen. Ethan, Mom says dinner's ready. Is that Dad? Hi, Dad. Liam's face appeared next to Ethan's, their twin features creating a mirror effect. Are you coming for my concert? I have to wear a tie and everything. Wouldn't miss it, Alexander promised. I'll be there Tuesday. After saying goodbye to both boys, Alexander returned to the board's proposal. With newfound purpose, he began drafting his counterproposal, a complete restructuring of his role that would allow him to run the company primarily from Newport, with a new COO handling day-to-day operations in New York. His phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. The boys seem happier after talking to you. Everything okay? Working on making things better, he replied. Can we talk tomorrow? There are some things we should discuss. Her response was quick. Coffee at the cafe before opening, 5 a.m. These early morning meetings had become their time to discuss co-parenting challenges without the boys or Mark around. Alexander had come to value them not just for their practical purpose, but for the glimpses they provided into Rachel's world. The next morning he arrived at Bennett's place to find not just Rachel but Mark as well. Both were sitting at the counter, cups of coffee already in front of them. Should I be worried? Alexander asked, only half joking. Sit down, Rachel said. Mark has something to say. Mark cleared his throat uncomfortably. Rachel tells me you're thinking of moving to Newport permanently. I'm working on making it possible, Alexander confirmed, accepting the coffee Rachel offered. Look, Mark began, then stopped, gathering his thoughts. The boys, they're different since you came. Happier, maybe, more settled. Ethan's coming out of his shell more, and Liam, he smiled slightly. Well, Liam's always been an open book, but now he's practically glowing. They're amazing kids, Alexander said quietly. You and Rachel did an incredible job raising them. Yeah, well. Mark stared into his coffee. That's kind of what I wanted to talk about. If you're going to be here permanently, we need to figure out how to make this work. All of us. For them. Rachel touched Mark's arm gently. Tell him what you told me. Mark took a deep breath. I'm not their father. I know that now. Really know it. But I love them. And I want to stay in their lives. So if you're serious about moving here, about being part of this, I'm willing to try making it work. Really try, not just tolerating each other. Alexander absorbed this, understanding the courage it took for Mark to make this overture. I'd like that, he said simply. They need both of us. Different roles, Mark agreed. But both important? Both important, Alexander confirmed. Rachel smiled, tears in her eyes. See? Was that so hard? Both men chuckled, breaking the tension. They spent the next hour talking practically, about schedules, about boundaries, about how to handle events like school functions and baseball games. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. As the sun rose over Newport, Alexander watched Rachel and Mark prepare the cafe for opening. They moved with the ease of long friendship, their earlier romantic tension replaced by something more sustainable. He could see now how this might work. Not a traditional family structure, but something uniquely their own. His phone buzzed with an email from his board chairman, requesting an immediate response to their proposal. Alexander began typing. I appreciate the board's concerns, but I'm proposing an alternative structure. He outlined his plan for remote leadership, emphasizing the technological solutions and delegation strategies that would make it possible. Through the cafe window, he could see the beach where he'd first spotted his sons playing in the sand. Everything had changed since that moment, yet somehow everything had also fallen into place exactly as it should. From deeper in the cafe came the sound of the twins arriving for breakfast before school. Liam's excited chatter, Ethan's quieter responses, their footsteps in perfect synchronization. Alexander saved his draft email and stood. Some things were worth fighting for, worth rebuilding entire corporate structures for. This was one of them. 6 months after Alexander first spotted his sons playing on the beach, Newport's winter winds whipped across the shoreline. He stood in his newly purchased beach house, not a rental this time, but a permanent home just down the coast from Rachel's, watching Liam and Ethan navigate the beach with their compasses. The boys had turned 11 last week. The birthday party had been a study in their new normal, Rachel organizing, Mark coaching the kids in party games, and Alexander providing the entertainment. A professional astronomer who helped the twins and their friends use telescopes and compasses to study the night sky. "They're getting pretty good at that," Mark commented, joining Alexander at the window. Their relationship had evolved into something resembling friendship, built on shared concern for the twins and mutual respect. "Ethan's teaching Liam about triangulation," Alexander explained. "He figured it out from that book I gave him." "Of course he did." Mark's smile held genuine affection. "Kid's brilliant, just like his father." The words came easily now, without the bitter edge they once carried. The sound of the front door opening announced Rachel's arrival. She entered carrying a stack of papers, her expression a mix of emotions. "The adoption papers came through," she said without preamble. All three adults stared at the documents that would legally establish Alexander's paternity while preserving Mark's legal role as a guardian. It had taken months of lawyers and negotiations to create this unprecedented arrangement, but they'd all agreed it was worth it to give the boys the security of having both men legally recognized in their lives. "Does this mean we can tell them?" Liam's voice startled them all. He and Ethan stood in the doorway, cheeks red from the cold wind, compasses still in hand. "How long have you been there?" Rachel asked. "Long enough," Ethan answered, his eyes fixed on the papers. "Those make Dad officially our dad, right? And keep Uncle Mark as our uncle legally?" Alexander knelt to their eye level. "Yes, if that's what you both want." The twins exchanged one of their silent conversations before Liam spoke. "We already knew you were our dad. This just makes it official for everyone else." "Like our compasses," Ethan added thoughtfully. "They don't create true north, they just help us find it. The truth was already there." Alexander's throat tightened at his son's insight. "That's exactly right." Rachel spread the papers on the coffee table, and they all sat down to sign, Alexander claiming his sons legally, Mark accepting his revised but equally important role, Rachel witnessing the moment that formalized what their hearts had already accepted. As the adults handled the paperwork, Liam turned to his brother. "Race you to the lighthouse? I bet I can find it faster with my compass." "You're on." Ethan grinned. "Dad, Uncle Mark, want a judge?" The two men exchanged glances before Mark spoke. "Actually, I think your dad should race too. Show you both how it's done." Alexander raised an eyebrow. "Pretty confident about my navigation skills, are you?" "Please?" Liam bounced on his toes. "Mom can be the official judge." Rachel laughed. "Fine, but bundle up, it's freezing out there." Soon they were all on the beach, Rachel and Mark at the starting point while Alexander and the twins positioned their compasses. The lighthouse stood as a distant beacon, its outline hazy in the winter air. "Ready?" Rachel called. "Set! Go!" They set off across the sand, each taking slightly different paths. Liam ran enthusiastically, checking his compass every few steps. Ethan moved more methodically, making careful calculations. Alexander found himself matching their pace, watching their different approaches with pride. Halfway to the lighthouse, Liam stumbled in the soft sand. Without hesitation, Ethan grabbed his brother's arm, steadying him. Alexander reached them a moment later. "You okay?" he asked Liam. "Yeah." Liam grinned. "But I think we're off course." "Here," Ethan offered, showing his calculations. "If we adjust 15 degrees east, Alexander watched his sons work together, combining Liam's intuition with Ethan's precision. They reached the lighthouse together, their paths converging naturally at the end. Back at the house, Rachel had hot chocolate waiting. As they warmed up, Alexander noticed Liam examining one of the adoption papers. "Dad?" Liam asked quietly. "Did you ever think about us? Before you knew about us, I mean." Alexander considered the question carefully. "I think part of me was always looking for something without knowing what it was, like a compass spinning without finding north." "And now?" Ethan prompted. "Now I know exactly where I'm supposed to be." Later that evening, after Rachel had taken the boys home, Alexander sat on his deck watching the lighthouse beams sweep across the darkening water. Mark stepped out, offering him a coffee. "They're amazing kids," Mark said, settling into the adjacent chair. "They are." Alexander turned to the man who had loved his sons first. "Thank you for everything you did while I was lost." Mark nodded, understanding all that wasn't said. "Just keep finding your way back to them, that's all any of us can do." Inside, Alexander's phone lit up with messages. From Liam. "Dad, we forgot to tell you about the science fair next month. I'm doing a project on celestial navigation." From Ethan. "Can we practice with the compasses again tomorrow? I want to teach Liam about magnetic variation." From Rachel. "They're happy. Really, truly happy." The lighthouse beam swept past again, strong and steady. Alexander thought about navigation, not just with compasses and stars, but through life and love and family. He thought about two boys who had inherited his features but built their own unique ways of seeing the world, about a woman who had raised them with grace and courage, about a man who had loved them enough to step aside while staying close. Most of all, he thought about true north. How sometimes you had to get completely lost before you could find it. How sometimes it wasn't a place at all, but a purpose, a love, a family. His compass sat on the deck railing, aligned with two smaller ones the twins had left behind. 3 needles pointing the same direction, different instruments working in harmony to find their way home. Just like them. The end. Based on this touching story of discovery, redemption, and the building of family ties, a profound reflection emerges. If you found out you had children you didn't know about, would you be willing to completely restructure your life like Alexander did? Would you abandon your comfort zone, established career and routine to build a real relationship with these children? Even knowing that you would have to deal with the complexity of sharing this love with someone who had already occupied the role of father for years? Your participation in the channel is very important. Please leave your opinion in the comments. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment your thoughts. Your participation is very important to us. See you next time.